So we are here at Vivid Racing. We're finally going to be doing the lowering springs and the wheels on the Civic Type R. I'm super excited. I've been waiting a couple months to do this. Sorry. We're pulling around back right now, and we might do a couple of other mods today depending on how much time we have. So super excited. Let's get to it. Get it on the lift so we can put the springs on. For the springs, here's what we got. We're doing Swift Sport springs. I've got these Megan Racing camber arms right here, and that's it. We're not going to do coilovers because I really like the adjustable dampening and drive modes that comes with the Civic Type R. So if I get coilovers, it totally eliminates that. These should drop it. I think these are like a 1.2 inch drop. So yeah, let's get to putting these bad boys on. Let's open this up. All right, so hopefully this isn't too hard to put on the car. I've never done this, so that's why we got Ian here, and then we're waiting on his friend to get here. Can't wait to see what this looks like before and after. Got the OEM spring out on here, and then we just gotta get this camber arm out. Where is it? So there's the camber arm. I'm gonna get that out, put the new one in, put the spring in, and then do it to the other side, and then we gotta do the fronts. He finally got this OEM camber arm off. You can see the difference here. This one's adjustable, so we can take care of any negative camber or add negative camber. Has the bracket screws right here. This one has it here. Good news, we got one spring off. As in we, I mean he. All right, party people, so it's actually the next day. It turns out when we got here yesterday, some of the parts weren't here. So we got the parts corrected. They got the Swift springs put onto the Civic Type R. We're not gonna be able to do wheels today, but you're not gonna see the difference because I'm gonna do wheels tomorrow. They just gotta come back from being balanced and mounted. They're getting the last strut onto the front right now, and then I believe we just snug everything down, make sure it's torqued, and we should have about a 1 inch drop. I'm gonna let it settle for a little bit, and then I'm gonna take it in and get an alignment once I get the new wheels put on it. Check this out. I think you guys can appreciate this Supra right here. So this is their shop car. It's a Supra 2020. They just got a basic one so that they can work on tunes and creating parts for it, but I'm really hoping they might let me drive this. I'm not 100% sure, but I'd love to make a video about it. Let me know down in the comments section if you want to see a Supra video. It looks like they've already done some wheels, tires, and suspension. They got the BBS on there. But anyways, let's go back to the Civic Type R. So once we get the suspension on here and the wheels, in the next video we're going to be doing the intercooler, and then we're going to go do the full exhaust. I got a new exhaust, and it's one that hasn't been out very long. I think you guys are going to like it. From what I've heard on the sound clips, it's one of the best sounding exhaust ever. And then there's going to be other modifications that are going to go to this, because if you follow me over here, this is their Mustang dyno. A lot of people call this the heartbreaker dyno because Mustang all-wheel drive dynos ultimately read about 20 to 25% low. So typically people are like, oh wow, I should be making 400 horsepower, and it shows like, you know, 350. That doesn't really matter when it comes to dynos. What matters is you see the difference from your bolt-ons. And because of the way that the Civic Type R ECU is designed, it doesn't matter what modifications you do to it, the ECU will learn how to compensate around them, so you don't really add power until you add the tune to it. So what we'll do is once we get everything done on the Type R as far as exhaust, intercoolers, we're gonna play with the tunes. I'm gonna do a comparison with the K-tuner and the Hondata tuner. And that way we can get a difference between what the baseline is with no mods. Then we'll see what the base maps from Hondata and the base maps from K-tuner. Once that's finished, I will be taking it to a specialist who specializes in Hondata tuning or K-tuner tuning, and we're gonna get a custom tune. Then we'll re-dyno it, and then we can see the differences between base map tunes and custom tunes. But before we do that, you guys need to see what it looks like while it's lowered on the stock wheels.
Do you have the courage to act outwardly on what you see inwardly? Or will you die a dreamer? Will you die on the verge and on the edge and in the land of coulda, woulda, and shoulda? If you don't want to make waves, be mediocre, be normal, and fit in. I will rejoice.
So yeah, that's what it looks like with the stock wheels. Now let's cut to the scene where I have the new wheels installed. Cool guys, so I figured I would kind of go through my process on why I chose the wheels, the tires, and the suspension that I chose. That way maybe it'll help you a little bit along the way, because you can really rack your brain trying to figure all this stuff out, what's best for you. I'll also include links to the wheels, the tires, and the springs, and also the camber arms. That way, if you want to pick this up for your car, that'll be there for you. So number one, the Civic Type R, honestly, just is really great out of the box. There's really not much that needs to be changed, and honestly, you could probably drive that car almost stock and probably not have too many gripes with it. But the one gripe that I noticed when I first bought the car was everyone was complaining about bent rims and cracked rims whenever they go over potholes and stuff like that. Because I read that, I did buy the extra wheel insurance for the Type R wheels, because I'd like to keep my OEM wheels as pristine as possible. In case I ever decide to sell the car, I could just throw them back on there, put the OEM springs back, and it's like nothing ever happened. So here's kind of where the crux of this whole thing comes into play. Honda designed the Civic Type R to not have any torque steer. They accomplished this in two different ways. One is with their limited slip differential, and then two is with the wheels and tires that they chose for this car. They were able to create a zero scrub radius. I'm not going to go into the details. There's been tons of articles about this, but essentially the scrub radius is like this angle that comes in. If you pretend this is your strut on the inside and then this is your wheel, where this angle comes down and where your tire makes contact with the ground is 0 degrees. Whenever you start adding offset to it, you start moving off of the zero scrub radius. Some people have said when they get aftermarket wheels, it reintroduces torque steer. I wanted to mitigate as much reintroduced torque steer as possible. The next thing I wanted was zero rubbing. I didn't want to have to trim anything inside the wheel well or on the fender so it wouldn't rub. I just wanted to choose the right setup so it wouldn't rub from the get-go. The next thing that was important to me was reducing weight, because it's unsprung weight. For those of you that might not be familiar with unsprung weight is anything that the chassis isn't sitting on. So your brakes and your wheels and your tires is all considered unsprung weight. Now, we all know about the horsepower to weight ratios, and one way to make your car faster is to make it lighter. Well, the cool thing is because we're dealing with rotational mass and rotational inertia, if you think about this, the average rule of thumb is for every pound of unsprung weight that you reduce is equivalent to removing 20 pounds of sprung weight. So that would be like removing your back seats and stuff like that is considered sprung weight. So I wanted wheels that were lighter, and then I also wanted wider wheels so I could get more traction because it is front wheel drive. The next thing that I wanted forged wheels. I didn't want cast and I didn't want flow formed. To kind of explain it briefly, cast wheels are like your just bare bones wheels that you would buy. They're the types of wheels that will bend and crack very easily if you hit a curb. And flow form is kind of an in-betweener of cast wheels and forged wheels. Well, I wanted forged wheels because they are the strongest wheels that you can get. The downside is forged wheels usually cost a fortune. One of the most popular wheels that people are buying for their Civic Type Rs or 10th gen Civics in general is the Volk TE37s. Now, I started looking at the Volk TE37s, but they come in around $825 to $900 per wheel, and that's without tires. So you're typically looking at anywhere from $3,500 up to $4,000, and that's before you add tires. You know, that was just a little bit beyond what I was willing to spend on wheels. If you want to go out and spend, $3,500 on wheels, that's all you. But I found Titan 7, which Titan 7, their whole goal is to make a forged wheel, which competes really well with brands like Volk. However, they come in at almost half the price. I believe they're about $530 a wheel, which comes out to just a little bit over $2,000 for a full set. They also have different finishes in the wheels. I have the TS5s. So in the TS5 lineup, they have the Techna Bronze, which are the ones that I have. They also have black, and then they have this anthracite color, which is kind of like a gunmetal. I kind of like the anthracites, but I really wanted to get Techna Bronze. Now, the downside with these wheels is because they are affordable and because they are forged and they compete very well with companies like Volk, there's a little bit of a waiting list to get them. So that's kind of a downside. However, for the size wheels that I got 18 inch by 9.5 inches in width, and I got a plus 45 millimeter offset. We'll talk more about offset here in a second. But for that wheel size, the Volks come in at a weight of 18 pounds. The Titan 7s come in at 18.3 pounds, whereas the OEM 20-inch wheels that come on the car are roughly 28 pounds. You save about an extra 0.3 pounds per wheel on the Volks versus the Titan 7s, but that was something I can deal with, considering that it was over $1,500 cheaper. Now, let's talk about the offset of the wheels. The offset is one of the ways that Honda was able to achieve the zero scrub radius. The reason is they use a 60 millimeter offset, which hardly anyone ever uses. And unfortunately, there just aren't many wheels out there that have a 60 millimeter offset. It's actually really tough to find wheels that fit the Civic Type R that have a high offset number like that. Now, some people wanted to go out and get low offset numbers like plus 35 millimeters and things like that. And essentially, the lower the number, the farther out the wheels protrude on the car. Now, that looks cool, but the problem is the further out you move them, the further out you get off of that scrub radius, the more torque steer that you're going to reintroduce. So I was like, man, this is a really tough decision. So I started reading around on the forums and I found that if you get 18 by 9.5, as long as you get a plus 45 millimeter offset and above, you won't get any torque steer reintroduced. And number two, you won't have to worry about trimming your fenders to make it fit so you don't rub. So far, I've been driving on these wheels, tires, and springs for about 2 months now. I haven't had a single issue of rubbing at all. It's actually been quite amazing. So that's why I chose the wheels that I chose. Now for the tires, I got the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S because I'm not really going to track my car very much. If I do end up tracking it, I'm just going to buy a whole nother set of wheels and get some real sticky tires just to take to the track. I wanted a good tire for daily driving, but also for spirited driving if I wanted to go through the canyons and, carve some corners and stuff like that. I wanted a tire that was still going to perform. So I wanted something with a good tread wear, but also good performance. And usually there's a trade-off with that. So with the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S, I believe they have a 40,000 mile warranty on the tire. That's not to say they're going to last that long, but they do have a really good warranty on them. Number two, they have a little bit harder of a tread wear. They're not quite as soft as the OEM tires on the sport contacts that came with the Type R, but that's okay with me because I got a wider tire that is 1.5 inches wider, so I can get extra traction if that makes any sense. But we'll talk more about the tires here in a second because we need to talk about the springs first, and then all this is going to come together. So the first weekend we installed just the springs and the camber arms. For the camber arms, I used Megan Racing camber arms. Then we used the Swift springs. The Swift springs drop it 1 inch all the way around. I almost went with the iBox springs. The iBox springs drop it like a little less than 1 inch, but for some reason, every time I saw photos of the Swift springs with 18-inch wheels, it just looked like it was the perfect stance and the perfect ride height and the perfect amount of wheel gap eliminated, at least for my needs. Now, the first weekend that we installed these, we only installed the springs and the camber arms. And then I drove it for a week, and then we installed the wheels and tires and some other stuff because they weren't ready the first weekend. Here's what I noticed about this. And this is something that I think a lot of people should think about. Number one, if you're gonna lower your car, at least with the Swift springs, you really don't want to run the OEM wheels and tires. It is incredibly bumpy. At first, when I first started driving it, I was like, well, this isn't too much different than stock. But then when I started going over bumps and stuff like that, because the springs are so much stiffer, there was a couple of times where I legitimately thought that I bent my rim or I broke my rim or I blew a tire just because of how hard it hit because of the stiffer springs. To be honest, regardless of what drive mode I was in, it would just chatter your teeth out with the stock wheels. Now, because I got smaller wheels, I got bigger tires. I got 265/35 18-inch tires. They fit perfectly. Now, what was crazy is when I went back to have the wheels installed and I started driving it, it felt better than it does stock. That's what I thought was really crazy. I couldn't believe how much of a difference just having more sidewall made on the comfortability of the ride. So right now, in the way it sits, it feels just like it did stock, except I have better looking wheels, I have tougher wheels, I have lighter wheels, and they're a little bit wider. The other thing I noticed when it was lowered on the OEM wheels was because it has a 60mm offset, the wheels looked really sunken in to the wheel well. And I was like, ugh, this just doesn't quite look right when it was lowered on stock wheels. So when we got the 45mm offset, it pushed it out 15mm. It almost now has the most perfect fitment that I've ever seen on a Civic Type R. And that's just my personal opinion, probably because it's mine. But that's just how I feel about that. Now, a couple of questions that some people have asked me is, did I cut my bump stops on the front struts? And the answer is no. From what I was told by the gentleman at Swift Racing was they designed the springs so you don't have to cut your bump stops. And if you've watched any of my previous videos on this build, one of my goals is to have this car completely reversible to go back to stock if I ever choose to. And so I just didn't cut the bump stops because of that. However, they did say you can trim them if you want. Now, when you're talking about other springs such as iBox or some other stuff that's out there, they're great springs, but most of them do require trimming of the bump stop. When I'm driving in comfort mode, this thing almost feels like a Cadillac. It's so smooth and it's so forgiving on the ride, even on a bumpy road, especially for the kind of car it is. But then when you get into sport and plus R mode, it definitely stiffens up and it feels like it's just gonna hang on to the road so well. One thing I did kind of notice is when I'm in plus R mode and I'm on a bumpy road, it does feel a tiny bit bouncier than it did stock. And that's probably because I didn't choose to cut the bump stops. But it doesn't affect my decision on not cutting them because it's not even that bad. But it's only when you're in plus R mode and you're on like a road that has a lot of dips and stuff in it. Other than that, I don't get any bounciness in it or anything. So from what others have told me in regards to their experience with aftermarket wheels on the Civic Type R regarding torque steer is if you do anything below plus 45mm, a lot of people have said that they do get torque steer reintroduced back into the car, which is something I don't want. You know, I love to keep the drivability of the car as stock as possible. When I took my first ride in it with the new wheels and tires on the car, I did feel like the torque steer came back, but it turned out that it was just my tires getting broken into the car. Once the tires broke in, there was no torque steer, but on the first couple of miles, it really did. I was like, oh man, this blows. Like I really felt like the torque steer came back
but it was just my tires adapting to the car. Once that happened, zero torque steer, none, nada, zilch. And now when I go over those harsh bumps, like the ones I mentioned earlier, I don't feel like I'm gonna break my rims. I don't feel like I'm gonna pop a tire. I don't feel like I'm gonna bend the wheels. I can go over those bumps with ease, and I don't have to, pucker my butthole every single time. It's just so much more amazing. I do feel like that the Civic Type R, they should have figured out a way to do 18 or even 19-inch wheels with a thicker tire on it and still reduce the scrub radius to 0. That's what I think they should have done, but then again, I'm not an engineer, and maybe they know something that I don't. But so far, I'm loving them. They're dead sexy. I will say this, if you do decide to get wider wheels, 100% get yourself some rock guards or mud flaps. I literally just installed the Rally Armor mud flaps onto my car because they stick out a little bit more. They were kicking up rocks, and I got 2 or 3 rock chips on my rear door and rear quarter panel from where the tires kicked up rocks. So I'm gonna have to go touch those up. I was really hoping to install the mud flaps on the same weekend as the tires. Unfortunately, I accidentally ordered the Civic Si set, and they're completely different than the Civic Type R set. So I'll make sure to include a link to those that I got and to the Civic Type R, or if you have a Civic Si, I'll link to those as well. But overall, I'm beyond ecstatic. I love the way the car feels, I love the way the car handles, and I love the way the car looks. And I didn't spend very much money at all. Total price with wheels, tires, and springs, and the camber arms, I'm just like a hair over $3,000. I think I'm around $3,300. So the wheels were about $2,100. The tires were probably close to $1,000, so that's about $3,100. Then we got the springs, which is like another $200 or so. Then I got the camber arms, which is another $150, so close to $3,400 maybe. But considering the fact that I got all of that for the price of just one set of Volk wheels, and they perform just as well, I'm incredibly grateful and happy with the setup. But ultimately, what are your thoughts, guys? I mean, for those of you that have Civic Type Rs and you've tried different wheel combinations, which wheel combination worked best for you? Did it reintroduce torque steer, or did you have to trim your fender so it wouldn't rub? I'd love to hear you guys' feedback. Personally, for me, I love having the extra sidewall. I mean, there's just no replacement for sidewall. Anyways, guys, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, but until next time, I love you. You guys stay sexy.